Hello and welcome to another episode of Drafting Notes, where Marco and I chat about all the foibles that being a writer is. I don't know why I use the word foibles. I don't think I've ever used that word in my entire
It makes you
life.
sound more writerly, though. So
Oh,
it's
maybe
good.
that's fine. That's good then. I'll maybe use it more often. So this week, the question I am wanting to pose to Marco is dealing with waiting. Marco knows something you're currently going through. How do you deal with waiting as an author? Because there's so much waiting involved in writing, whether it's agents or publishers or beta readers or whatever. A lot of it is sitting around twiddling your thumbs. So what do you do when you're waiting?
Yeah, it is a tricky one because, like as you say, there are so many um, points in the
Yeah.
writing process where you're waiting. It's a funny thing writing because it takes you, it can take you years, certainly months, to write a book where you're on your own. But then when you actually summon up the courage to then send it out there to people, it suddenly begins this clock of waiting all the time for things, whether that's for when you're querying to agents, with then if you get an agent, when they're sending or waiting to hear back from the agent with editorial stuff
Yeah.
potentially, then sending it out in submission and waiting to hear from editors. And then I imagine, I don't know because I've not experienced this yet, but even after you've been signed, you're still then waiting. Probably you want to see what the cover's like, you want to see what the edits that the publishers are going to make. It's all a big waiting game, and it
Yeah.
is difficult. It is difficult at times as an author to work your way through that, because it can be, often the advice is, I think, just work on something else. Take your
Yeah.
mind off it, work
Yeah.
on something else. But it's not always easy to do that. Depending on what stage of waiting you're at, it can be quite tricky to focus on something new sometimes. I mean, how do you deal with it?
I think you're right. I think it, it's very difficult. And I think you do end up, kind of overthinking it. My mind often goes to the worst place, especially when I'm sending new stuff out there, and you're just kind of like, they're going to hate it. That they've not got back to me because they hate it, and they're working out what is the best way to sack this guy because he's just utter shit. So it is, I think trying to keep your mind from going to that kind of spiraling doom place
Yeah.
is the best way to deal with it. So I think it is the cliches I find which kind of work for me, like working on something new, which is what everyone always says, and actually is probably the best thing I found that I can do, which is just totally uses up my mind to focus on something else, and I don't have any space to overthink my previous project. So I suppose that is quite something which I do quite like. The downside to that, I think, is what do you do? I think if you're like if you've, for instance, if you've written a book that's maybe the first of a series,
Yes.
what do you do next? Do you start working on another book, a potential book two? What if book one doesn't go anywhere? So what to write next, I think, is a really difficult question. Not just what, no, I
Whether
mean,
you
not
should
just
write
what,
next.
well, you should, yeah, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Um,
No. 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 I agree entirely. I mean, and I suppose it, in part, must depend on your writing process, because obviously just writing another book isn't always like, it's
yeah,
easy said, but it's
just
not
write the
easy to
book.
do.
Easy.
But yeah, no, actually, it's funny you should say that about the a potential series, and do you write the next book in the series? I mean, because that's something that I was dealing with, and it seems to me that unless you have a burning, unless you can almost start it immediately, it would
Yeah,
seem a bit silly to start that next book, in my view, because that first book might not go anywhere. And so there might be all that wasted effort of writing a book that is just going to never get anywhere because the first one doesn't land anywhere.
yeah,
So definitely, I think it can be worthwhile planning a new book out, and do a detailed plan for it if you want, or just make notes or something, so you've got it there to come back to. But I think maybe doing something else can also help take your mind off the waiting in a way, because I think if you're working on the same story, even if it's a series, then you're still focused on, well, wait, when am I going to hear back about
yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
one that
I
I've
think
just
that's
written?
right. Your
Whereas if it's
mind's
something
still in that
entirely
zone.
new, it kind of detaches from that, and you can, it maybe helps you focus. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
That in my experience, it does help you. It can maybe be more difficult to get into at first, but it can. It's easier to then suddenly find yourself taken up by the writing and the way that
yeah.
writing can do to you.
And I also think that writing, like we've talked before in the main podcast, is a kind of muscle, isn't it? You know, the more you do, the better you
Yeah,
get, the quicker you get into the mindset of writing, etc. And I think because I'm always often being quite tempted to say, well, I've done it, it's handed it in, I'm going to take a month off now and play video games, whatever. And then you go back a month later and you've had an amazing month off, but you feel quite rusty and stuff. So I feel it's quite nice to kind of keep the writing going, even if it's not as in the same pace, you're trying to hit a deadline, etc. But you're still kind of keeping your foot in the water. Um,
yeah.
your foot, your toe, your foot, your whole
Your
body.
foot in
Just
your, I mean, you
you're
could
drowning
have it.
yourself in the water,
You
but
could, yeah,
it's over
you're
your head.
drowning yourself in the water because you're so sick of waiting.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't do
You're just
that.
killing yourself. Yeah, fucking screw it. I'm going
That's
to
not advice
go in the
that
bathtub and
I would
um,
recommend.
but so maybe I was thinking maybe like maybe short stories. Maybe this is the point where a short story comes in because you think, well, this is a short term project. You know, it's like a 5,000, 10,000 words type thing, and I can experiment a little. I know we've talked to someone before. I can't remember who it was. Probably more than one person who said that they loved short stories because they've got to experiment with new techniques or perspective or something different before trying to put it into a full length novel and then realizing halfway through it doesn't work. And I like the idea of that. So using it as a kind of experimental playing field, playing ground.
Yeah,
So maybe
yeah.
that's what you can do.
I think that's definitely true about short stories generally. But I mean, do you write short stories? I've
No,
never
no, God,
read a
no.
short story. Oh, so you're
No. I like the idea of them, and I like the idea of having downtime where I would like, oh, right, short story, and I'd love the idea of experimenting with form or whatever on that
yeah.
short idea, you know, that short scale. I just I just haven't done it.
Yeah, you're much more of the I'll just play a computer game
Yeah,
while I
exactly.
wait.
Yeah, yeah, and then spend 6 months to get back into the writing mojo
Yeah,
after I
exactly,
finished Baldur's
exactly.
Gate 3 6 times
But
over.
no, yeah, it's a tricky one. I don't know, you know, as with all these drafting notes episodes, I'm not sure there is a definitive answer. But I think anyone that tries to give you a definitive answer when it comes to writing is lying to you because everyone works through these
Yes.
things in their own
Yeah.
way. But I definitely think you can. What we can agree on is that it's probably bad to just focus on it, just to to
Mhm.
be at that inbox and totally refreshing it every single minute of every
Oh,
single
yeah,
day.
yeah. I think mental health wise, it's
Find
not good, is
something
it?
else, whether that is playing a computer game or watching a Netflix series or something like that. Rather, even if it's not writing, just try and take your mind off it because these you will eventually hear back.
Yeah.
Or maybe you won't if it's in the case of querying, you might get
Yeah,
ghosted. But
actually, that's a good point. You almost certainly won't hear back.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, at least you give it a bit of time, and then
But at
you'll
least you
know.
you'll hit that 3 or 6 months and think, "Well, that's it. I'm now calling it," one way or the other.
And also, I think this sounds very pretentious. I always hate when writers say things like this, but
Here we
it,
go. Here
it
we go.
is. It is exactly. It is the writing, though. There is a desire to write in anyone that wants to
Yes.
be a writer
Yeah.
ultimately, and after a bit of time, you will want to tell new stories. Often it comes
No,
when you're actually
I
writing
completely agree. Yeah.
a story. You've got a brilliant idea for the next one,
Yeah.
but
Usually when you actually hate what you're currently writing, you think, "Ah,
yeah,
this is a much
exactly.
better idea."
But I think just maybe don't. So what I'm maybe talking myself into is that you don't want to force yourself into doing something. I think the thing is just try not to focus on the waiting,
Yes.
and
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I think by doing that, by distracting yourself in different ways, the writing will come back to you anyway because that's what you want to do. You're a writer,
Yeah.
you
And
know.
and and as you say, I mean, we kind of joked about it, but I think it is when you've finished writing a book, it is a big effort. It's a
Hmm.
monumental effort finishing a book, and I think you do need to celebrate that in some way. So I think it is genuinely good for your mental health to then sometimes take a step back and think, right,
Yeah, 100%.
I'm gonna take a week off and I'm gonna because often I find that I do put other things off because I'm saying, no, I'm not gonna play that game or I'm gonna watch that TV show because I want to finish this book. So I think it is good to then reward yourself with the stuff
Yes.
you have been putting
Uh-huh.
yourself off. So like I often find that I don't read certain books when I'm trying to write something because I don't want that book to kind of and take over the voice that I'm trying to do or something, or I don't want to read a book and think, oh, that's much better. Why don't I think of doing that? And lose my focus. So often I'll have a pile of books that I'll say, well, I'm going to save those books till I finish write this draft, and then
Hmm.
I'll dive into them. So I think it is good to have stuff that you do reward yourself with after finishing a book for sure.
And then the other side of it is, I guess, certainly when you're queer, there are things you can do. You can often feel powerless, I think, which is where the pain of the waiting comes from.
Mhm.
So we're talking about ways to distract from that, I guess. But on the other side of the coin, that what can you do? Well, I think you can, if you're querying, you can. You'll probably have sent out a batch of queries. I don't know, 10, 15, something like that.
Yeah.
You can then, after a while, say, right, I'm going to send out another batch of queries. So that's taking a bit more control, and you'll feel a bit better about it in that point. If you've got an agent that is then making submissions, you can speak to your agent and say, look, what's happening? Can we have a catch up? Can we have a chat and try and find out there? And that can sort of calm your nerves as well
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
what's happening. And the same, I'm sure, when you're picked up and you've got a publisher and you've got an editor, try and get, although I appreciate getting people's attention in the publishing industry can be difficult
Yeah.
sometimes, but
No, you're right though.
I think try and get some piece of control back by
Yeah.
having a conversation with someone or sending them
Yeah.
an email or just something like that, and then that can help you um, lose that anxiety of the waiting, which is what it is. That's what
Yeah.
we all hate.
And I think also writing communities are really good, because
Yes, 100%.
so much of writing, as we've chatted about before multiple times, is you by yourself in a room, in your own head. Especially if you don't have a day job, and even if you do have a day job, I suppose you're not really talking about writing stuff really most of the time with that.
No.
So I think if you can have a writing community or a Discord, like the Page One Discord, or somewhere you can go
Yes.
and chat about stuff, I think can be good. And often just realize that you're not the only one who goes through this stuff, and other folk might have it worse, etc. Perspective, I think, can be really good, and having
Yeah.
a place you can unload and just vent and moan, and people will understand it and take it.
I
Is
mean,
great.
as you know, I love a vent and a moan.
Yeah.
That's 90% of my communication with not just Tarek, but anyone that knows anything about my writing. It's what I need to do. That's how I cope.
But
I, I'm not
it's
sure it's
it's
the
good to
way.
get off your chest,
No,
though.
it is good to get it off your chest. Maybe don't do it as much as I do it. That's what I would say. But no, I mean, I hope this has been a bit useful to people in terms of just thinking about it, dealing with something that happens to every single writer.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter how established you are, you're
yeah,
going to have these periods where you're waiting and you're anxious about what's out there. Um, and I think though, yeah. So there are two. You can distract yourself in some way, but also there are ways of, to use a dreadful phrase, taking back control over that anxiety, I guess, and trying to speak to someone and just try and find out what's happening,
yeah,
and also kind of in your mind accepting that this is part of publishing. If you want to be
yeah,
a published writer, there will be these periods of waiting, and you just have to find your own way of how to cope with them, I think.
yeah. No, I totally agree. I think there's some excellent points there, Marco. And as much as I never thought I would find myself agreeing with both yourself and Farage, taking back control of something is often very, very useful.
Yeah, I
Whether
think
it's writing
Boris was
or,
the one that had
yeah,
it, but
exactly. Oh, is it Boris?
equally bad
I
in
mix up
my book.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're all just one big pool of.
yes, indeed. But let's not get onto that
No,
topic.
sorry, we're off topic.
Well, thanks very much for joining us for this new episode of Drafting Notes. We will have another insight into our writing thoughts very, very soon. And you can check them all out on our Patreon. So please do check that out.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.